I've been walking around with this on. Oh my goodness. Okay. I'm sorry. That just brings back memories of Lilburn, Georgia. I was headed to the restroom and I stopped to talk at the nursery there to a lady, and I was glad I did. Because one of the men came out and said, okay, Lee, it was the start of Bible class, and I gave everybody 5 minutes to do something. He walked back there and said, turn your mic off. So thank you. Me and Chris had a nice discussion in the men's room. I don't know if you heard all that or not, but anyway. Oh, me. Oh, nothing like getting my mind just, okay. All right, we are in 2 Samuel chapter 13, toward the end of the chapter, somewhere around verse 32, and to catch up. I don't know what to call this study, how not to do family, how to be a dysfunctional family. And trying to learn some lessons from this. I don't want it just be a history lesson, obviously. Try to learn some lessons. Some of this, especially in the next chapter, chapter 14. Some good things to learn, but just a lot of looking at the facts necessarily. But you're helping me. I appreciate it. Good questions. Making me think about how to teach this, and I appreciate it very, very much. So, when the news had come that all of the sons of David had been killed, you can anticipate the reaction to that. And then he learned that wasn't the case, and Jonadab informed him that it only had been Amnon. And again, this still the heart of David mourning for his son. I have had too many funerals where parents were burying children, and sometimes young children. I know it's one thing to go to a funeral for someone who's in their 70s and mom's still in her 90s and living, but still hard. Parents are not supposed to bury children, so just hard. And so David, still in all his humanity, he loved his kids in some ways. He didn't do a very good job raising them in a lot of ways, but still had an affinity for them, so we're not surprised by that. So, for only Amnon is dead, verse 33. Verse 34, then Absalom fled, and he and the people with him. Jonadab, verse 35, said to the king, look, the king's sons are coming, as your servant said, so it is. And so it was, as soon as he had finished speaking, that the king's sons indeed came, and they lifted up their voice and wept, and the king and all of his servants wept bitterly. And so that was a time of mourning that they all needed. We're told that Absalom then, at this point, flees and goes to the king of Geshur. The best I can tell, that Geshur is kind of northeast of the Sea of Galilee. One place calls it being a part of Syria. So he flees there to this king. I've seen a couple of pronunciations of this, but Talmahi, king. Why did Absalom go there? This is the great trivial question. It is. This is Grandpa. This is his wife's, this is his mother's father. 2 Samuel 3, David had married this daughter of the king of Geshur and had 2 children with her. Her name is Maacah, and of course had not only Absalom but Tamar. So you wonder if Absalom thinks, okay, I'm going to run off to my grandpa's, and I'll get treated well there, and maybe they'll see my side of things, and I'll be protected there. So there's a reason why he fled there. I'm not sure that I would have even thought about that until I saw some comment that made me think about it a little bit. King David longed to go to Absalom, for he had been comforted concerning Amnon because he was dead. Couple questions. And I don't like to do this when I raise some translation questions about a passage. There is some indication that the idea of longed for, and Kyle and Daly say this is similar to a passage in Deuteronomy 28, verse 7, where it says that one nation came out against another nation. You know, the question is, why did David want to go after Absalom? Was it because now that Amnon is dead, he's reaching out to the son who killed his brother? Is there a sense of compassion? Does he want to go to him? Does he want the relationship to be reconciled? Or is it that he wanted to go get him to bring him to a point of punishment? Some indication in the mind of some that could be the case. But then you have verse 1 of the very next chapter, chapter 14, in which, let's look at that. That Joab, it says, could see or perceived that the king's heart was concerned about Absalom. So at that point, you get the feeling that David wants to know how Absalom is doing. How am I going to help a son who has just killed my son, killed his brother? The English reading of that is the easiest to consider. That simply, the obvious sense of it is that David had this yearning for the return of his son, and Job could see that David had these feelings for Absalom. Wouldn't be surprised by that, even though, is he angry? Does he want justice to be meted out against his son? Somebody, by the way, asked the other day after the study, what about Amnon? What Amnon did in abusing, raping Tamar, that was worthy of death. So Absalom kills him, but I don't think that's the way the law wanted them to do it. They were to do it through kind of a system of being tried. You couldn't put a man to death on just the mouth of one witness. The elders of the city would be involved. So that probably should have happened instead of Absalom and his perhaps vigilante justice here. So Amnon could have eventually been put to death because of what he had done. David doesn't seem to have had any concern about seeing that was done. And then when Absalom takes this on himself and kills his brother, and then David what's he want here? Is it just a natural parent yearning for a son who has made a tragic mistake? Or is it justice that he was looking for? The thing that makes me wonder what David really wanted in this story is what? If you read chapter 14, he gets Absalom back to Jerusalem and doesn't talk to him for 2 years. So if you're really yearning to be with your son, you want to talk to your son, you want to find out how you can help your son, then you finally are convinced to bring him back to Jerusalem. For 2 years, you have nothing to do with him. In fact, you tell him, you go stay in your house, I'll stay in my house. There's no relationship whatsoever. that has caused some to suggest that, David was still very upset about what Absalom has done, and perhaps was working out, okay, how do I handle this? Of course, all of that, very tragically, is going to play itself out. That we'll see what happens later. So, saying all of that, I'm not asking you to think one way or the other about what David was looking for. Let me stop and ask, any thoughts about that? Yes.
I still see David reliving what he did, and all this background. We saw where he did nothing about what Amnon did, and now I think he doesn't know how to handle
Absolutely. Right.
He doesn't know how to handle the situation.
Right.
He's been guilty of the same thing, and all this is still living inside him.
Right.
That's just my perspective.
Well, I think that's a good point, and I think that's well said, probably better than anything I've just read today. But, yeah. How do you handle this? The most tragic funeral I've ever preached was for a 22-year-old, a couple that were Christians, and some of the dearest folks I've ever known. They had 3 children. 2 of them are faithful. This one had gotten in drug and alcohol problems when as a teenager, and then eventually was trying to do better. And I think I just talked to him a couple or 3 weeks before, but he had sold a motorcycle to a fella, and the guy hadn't paid him $600 for the motorcycle. And all we know is the last 2 things he did was to shoot the man who didn't pay him $600 and then turn around and put the gun on himself. All I remember about that funeral is I had an audience full of young people that he had been friends with and been in rehab facilities with. And that may have been the only thing that got me through preaching that. His parents were remarkably strong through that. But I guess that's the closest thing I've ever been, that kind of a tragedy, and seeing what family would go through and how they would go through that. So, yes, sir.
I definitely see how things can pile up, but also, I mean, from David's point of view, in a way, he lost 2 sons that day.
Yes.
Right? From one point of view. But another way to view this, though, is Amnon was the oldest.
Yes.
So he would have been in line for the throne,
Yes.
originally.
Right, right.
So that's another complication
Yeah.
for this.
That's right. Amnon was firstborn. And that's interesting. It comes into play what happens in chapter 15. Yes, Brian.
I kind of wonder if David's seeking after Absalom. It may be, certainly love for his son, but it may be guilt and remorse that he hadn't done anything for 2 years, and that drove. Because you imagine, we were told that he had thought about this from the beginning, right? As soon as his sister had been raped. But had that been taken care of, that wouldn't have never happened. He would have not had the opportunity or even the motive for revenge.
Right.
Maybe David was feeling guilty about not taking care of the problem he really should have.
And I think it's absolutely possible, and tying that in with Bruce's comments, I think that's possible. All right. Otherwise, obviously a very, very unhappy situation. So, Joab, when he sees this, decides, okay, let's see if I can fix this. And he sends a woman to tell David a story. There's a part of me that said, another story? The last story didn't go so well, so now I'm going to hear another story, but this is way different. So Joab is trying to concocts a plan to try to get David to go get Absalom and bring him back. So he asked this woman, a wise woman, the translation, the New King James says, the word wise is the same as cunning used to describe Jonadab. So she's crafty, she's able to pull this off, she can put on a good act, and he tells her what to say. So he puts all of his words, it says that she would speak all of the words that he put in her mouth. Verse number 3. You know, as I struggle sometimes to find some New Testament principle in all of this, and I don't think there is, but I do believe that we need to speak as the oracles of God. I want to speak the words God puts in my mouth, and I do that by reading the scriptures. So, interesting phrase. And so he gives her this story. So she goes, she's from Tekoa. Tekoa is where the prophet Amos was from. We'll do that some years later. So she comes with this story. And the story is she's a widow. Because all of this is a story. Remember that. As you're going through this, I begin thinking this really happened. You know, it's so real. But she's a widow. Her husband's died. She has 2 sons. And they get in a fight with each other one day. Nobody else around. And one of them kills the other. And then the family, the clan, the rest of the family, wanted to put the one son to death. And in putting him to death, that means all of her husband's boys were gone. And he would have no heir. No family lineage would not be carried on. And that was a big deal in Israel, right? That was a shame if a man didn't have any sons to carry on his name. So she comes with this story. He tells her the story and comes to David and tells the story. David asks her in verse 5, what troubles you? She comes and she's able to put on this great act that she falls on her face before the king. What troubles you? And then she tells him this story. And now the family had now risen up against her. Deliver your son to us. City of refuge is never in this picture, but you probably think a little bit about that. And so the story is told. They want to extinguish my ember, in verse number 7, that is left, and leave my husband neither name nor remnant on the earth. And so David says to her, says, just go back home, and I'll give orders concerning you. He genuinely, I think, says, I'll take care of this. I'll take care of the matter. 3 times in this passage, he has to assure her that he will take care of her. And she just wants assurance through all of this. In verse number 9, my Lord, O King, let the iniquity be on me and on my father's house, and the king and his throne be guiltless. I think this was worded by one commentator, and it helped me. She was in essence saying, if this bloodshed is not punished, then let the guilt fall upon me and my family, not on you and the throne. So in other words, I'll take the responsibility if it's not taken care of, and you won't have to bear the blame of that. But he assures her that the avengers were not going to bother her. He said to her, whoever does anything to you, bring him to me, and he shall not touch you anymore. Again, this is all just a story, but it's very real to David, very real to us as we read it. And David is saying, okay, just bring him to me. We'll take care of it. Those avengers are not going to harm you or your son. And then she says, please, King, remember the Lord your God. So now she's saying, will you pray about this? Take it to God in prayer. Don't permit the avenger of blood to destroy any more, lest they destroy my son. And he said, as the Lord lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground. So that seems at that point to give her assurance that this is not going to happen. I do find it's interesting that not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground. You read ahead a little bit, and we'll talk about Absalom and all his long hair. But hair is a part of the story. Thoughts or comments up to verse number 11, or questions? All right, so you got the setting. So David's heard the story, promised her, I'm going to take care of this. 3 times assures her, I'm going to take care of this. Then the woman said, please let your maidservant speak another word to my king. And he said, well, say on. And the woman said, well, why then have you schemed? Now remember, she's saying this because this is what Joab told her to say. Why have you schemed such a thing against the people of God? For the king speaks this thing as one who is guilty, and that the king does not bring his banished one home again. For we shall surely die and become like water spilt on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. Yet God does not take away a life, but he devises means so that his banished ones are not expelled from him. So this is the reason for the story. And he seems to be telling him that your son could be killed. Now, what if the rest of your family decides to be the avengers? They're going to kill Absalom. So you probably ought to get him here. Because if he dies, he's going to be dead. Don't you enjoy some of these little phrases in the Bible about our life and the brevity and when we die, like spilled water on the ground? You know, once it goes in the ground and you can't gather that back up and put it in the cup you just dumped over. It's gone. Can't retrieve it. And she's just simply saying to him, his life will be over. And you won't be able to retrieve him. You won't be able to go back and get him. So she's working on David's heart. Joab's working on David's heart through him. But she still tries to appear to make the story real. That this is the real reason, but in the midst, maybe she's trying the best she can to convince David that this story is real, that he'll get the point, and then she can just slide out of the picture and let Joab and David take care of this without her having to answer any questions about it. So now, therefore, I have come to speak of this thing to my lord the king, because the people have made me afraid. Back to her story. And your maidservant said, I will now speak to the king. It may be that the king will perform the request of his maidservant. For the king will hear and deliver his maidservant from the hand of the man who would destroy me and my son together from the inheritance of God. Your maidservant said, the word of my lord the king will now be comforting. For as the angel of God, so is my lord the king in discerning good and evil, and may the Lord your God be with you. She again is trying to make her story look real and does a very good job of it. But then she flatters David. I don't know if she really genuinely felt this. Like an angel of God, like someone speaking for God, speaking God's words. You know the difference between good and evil. You're a discerning man. You'll be able to see through this and see and provide a remedy for the problem that she had brought to him. I don't know at this point, obviously. Well, I do know. I don't know where Joab was in this story. It appears to me in when it goes from talking to her in verse 20 to verse 21, he looks over at Joab, or he says to Joab, I suppose Joab could have been somewhere else. In the meantime, he went and got him. But there's part of me that says Joab is there all the time. And so then he looks at this woman and he says, can I ask you a question? Joab put you up to this? And Joab's standing over there like, oh my goodness, he's figured me out. And at that point, David showed he is a discerning man because he's figured it out. So, what's he going to do with this? He is wise according to the wisdom of God. What's he going to do? So Joab looked at David and said, all right, you got me on this one. Go get him. Go get him. I've granted this thing. Go therefore and bring back the young man Absalom. And Joab fell to the ground on his face and bowed himself and thanked the king. And Joab said, today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, my lord, O king, and that the king has fulfilled the request of his servant. So Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. And the king said, let him return to his own house, but do not let him see my face. So Absalom returned to the king's house, but did not see the king's face. And in verse 28, we're told that went on for 2 years. So again, What's going on here? I'm going to ask this question, and this get crazy with this, but is there any, do you have any idea what Joab's motive is in any of this? Or any ideas what it might be?
I think God's using Joab to show David these consequences are coming to pass.
Oh,
God uses
okay.
him to bring that out.
I like that answer, Bruce. The reason I like that answer, I read some other answers that I didn't like. I just don't know that Joab was really, one person suggested he wanted Absalom to come back because he thought Absalom would become king, and then somehow he would have Absalom's favor, and he would have there's no indication that takes place in the rest of the story. In fact, later on, when Absalom is killed, Joab gets upset at David and over being mourning because Absalom died, when evidently perhaps he deserved to do that. Somebody else. I just can't think of any motive that Joab had other than wanting David to do what was right. Maybe, and again, if this idea that he saw the longing in David's heart, that he did want them to maybe reconcile, maybe there's some good could come from this. Don't know. But remember, all of this is happening. Why? And as some of you have already pointed out, David was told, the adversaries are going to rise up from your own family as a result of his sin with Bathsheba. Okay? One commentator called this bringing him back but not talking to him for 2 years, half forgiveness that led to bitter fruit later on. So it doesn't turn out well, as we see here in just a little while. So, yes, Chris, please.
David wasn't ready to bring it back. He was kind of forced into it, and then and then he kind of gets forced even further later. He wasn't ready for any of these steps, but he's kind of getting forced into it. So he's going as far as he's forced. From one way to the other, right?
Good point. I think we're all sitting here thinking, we've had to deal with our children, and they've made mistakes, they've sinned even, and try to help restore them. We want to see them saved. We want them to do what's right. Maybe sometimes don't know exactly how to do that in some situations, but we try to find a way, maybe a Joab in our life trying to help us restore those relationships. Anyway, so in the middle of this, we have a description of how handsome Absalom was. In verses 25 through 27, we have the outward appearance of Absalom described. It says he was praised for his good looks more than anybody else in Israel. So there wasn't a blemish on his body anywhere, from head to foot, not a blemish. When I was a teenager, if any of you had any stock in the company that made Clearasil, you can thank me. And buy a lot of it. So I wasn't this guy here. I may bring it Sunday. I meant to bring a picture. I may bring a picture that my old schoolmate, teammate at Western sent me about my sophomore year at Western, and I showed Betsy, and she said, in all seriousness, "Who is that?" I didn't remember ever having hair that long. So at the end of the year, Absalom cuts his hair off, so apparently he lets it hang down, and he cuts it off. In fact, it weighs 3 pounds. That's about, some estimates of what 200 shekels was. That made me laugh too. I couldn't cut my hair off and make a needle on it. Make a needle on a scale even move right now. But apparently this was a picture of, attractiveness, manliness. I don't know if that tradition went back to Samson or not. But This is a guy pretty full of himself. And we're going to find that even more as we get into chapter 15, the first part of 15. I thought we'd stop here and talk for a minute and let you talk. By the way, before I forget it, he has 3 sons and a daughter, and his daughter's name was Tamar, named probably after his sister. What about our culture today? What does our culture value? And do we praise the looks of others too much? Do we praise others, our young people, our children? Can we praise them too much? Yes or no, or what should we be doing? What instead of praising their attractiveness? Thoughts or comments? Go right at it. Yes, Bruce.
I remember a case where people bragged on this certain boy about how good looking he was when he was young, and it went to his head, and he ended up in prison. Just, he thought he could get out of anything. It was really ridiculous. Be detrimental.
It can go to a person's head. Actually begin letting that be the attention they get because of their attractiveness. Is it valued in our culture? Pretty highly. Advertising. Who do they use in advertising? Paul Earnhardt said a few years ago that we live in a culture that values youth, wealth, and attractiveness. He said, I was one of those once. But we do value that. We have contests, beauty contests. We put our kids on Facebook, and everybody says, oh, they're so cute, and they're so pretty, and they're so beautiful. And maybe that's okay when they're 2 and 3 years old, but as they get older, we continue to do that. And I tell you, the danger is the very thing that Bruce just talked about goes to their head. They actually begin to think that. I've said this, I wouldn't say it, and this is going to be I was going to say something about my daughter. I guess I didn't have to tell you that, but, you know, I tell dads, I said, if you have a daughter that's cute and charming, get your gun ready and set it by the front door. And even Christians, you know, that attraction. And she was those things. And still is, an attractive young lady. But what does God value? We know the answer to that. We absolutely know the answer to that. He values our character. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord shall be praised. Proverbs 31. Is anything wrong with being attractive? No. Daniel and his 3 friends, this was the Babylonian standard, by the way, that the king wanted men chosen to be this group of men that he's going to train at the school of the Chaldeans, and it says they were young men in which, again, there was no blemish, but good looking. Daniel 1 and verse 4. You know, it's interesting that God sometimes points out that some people were attractive. Maybe to let us know that that itself not the problem. It became a problem for Absalom, but it wasn't for Daniel. Very godly man. David himself, remember, was described as a handsome person, and the Lord is with him. 1 Samuel 16, when he was going to be chosen to be the next king. So I think it's just a good thing to think about. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were 3 of those friends as well that would have been those young men. There's not much in the New Testament. Job's daughters, his latter daughters, are described as being some of the most attractive in the land. When Jacob had a choice between Rachel and Leah, he's more attracted to Rachel. It says Leah had sad eyes, some translations said. I don't know what that means exactly, but she seemed to not be as attractive as Rachel was. So we're all attracted. We all got attracted to somebody when we got married, but we realize that if that's the basis of a relationship, then it just... And we see that in Hollywood. We see it in sports. We see it all over the place, and people that are successful, and that's another thing. But if outward appearance is what we're about, you know, we can go to the gym and try to keep up a certain body shape. As my brother Brownlee Reeves says, I'm maintaining the shape. Pear is a shape. But, you know, whatever you do, it's going to, at some point, not going to be like when you were 30 years old, 20 years old, 30 years old. You've got to have way more involved. So I just think this Absalom, and I don't mean I'm just trying to fill in time here, but we do need to think about it, how we praise our kids and make sure that we're emphasizing not attractiveness, not their success in sports, not their academic success. If they have those, good, fine. Make sure they're learning good, godly principles and all of that. But let's make sure that we're praising their character, their behavior, their servant hearts. Let's make sure we're building them up from very little, that they'll focus on the things that God wants them to be. Justin.
I think it's interesting that Saul was also described as the most handsome of the sons of Israel.
Say again.
I think it's interesting that Saul was also described as the most handsome
Yes, he was.
of Israel, and had an ego problem that manifested itself in the jealousy of David, which we're going to talk about that a little bit shortly.
Very good. Very good point. Comparing them. Anybody else? So, what's that mean? Yeah. And I remember being in school, I remember girls that, you know, they weren't attracted by world standards, and they didn't get treated well, and they didn't have the boyfriends, and, you know, it just, you know, at the time, just a stupid teenager. But, you know, later on, you kind of felt sorry for them. And so anyway, don't be puffed up. Don't be proud. Let's make sure we keep ourselves humble regardless of whatever worldly attraction there may be. So, Absalom, sitting around for 2 years, wonder why I don't get to talk to my father. So he sends to Joab twice, why don't you come and get me? Why don't you go to my father? Tell him I'm here. I want to talk to him. I want to see him. And Joab ignores those two requests. So Absalom says, I'll get his attention this way. And he does what? Burns his fire, burns his field of barley, starts it on fire. I think there's other ways you could have got his attention, don't you think, without destroying his crops. And that gets Joab's attention, and Joab runs over there and says, what are you doing? What do you do this to my crops for? And, you know, he says, what's obvious? He said, listen, I've sent to you. Come here, and I can go to my father, the king. You know, if I don't get to see my father, why did I even come here? I'll go back to my grandpa. Things were a lot better back there. So he gets to go into David's presence. Verse number 32. Now, therefore, let me see the king's face. But if there is any iniquity in me, let him execute me. Interesting. If I've done something worthy of death, okay, I'll accept that from my father. So Joab went to the king and told him. And when he called for Absalom, he came to the king. He bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king. And then David kissed Absalom. So everything's going to be okay, right? If you stop there, you think, oh, good. There's going to be some reconciliation. Absalom is going to demonstrate some godly character here, relationship with his father. That's not what happens. So, chapter 15, Absalom goes out and gets himself some chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. What an entourage. What's he up to? What's he trying to do here? Well, we see where he's headed with all of this. And by the way, the kings of Israel were taught, do not multiply horses for yourselves. Don't put yourself in a position where it appears that you're trusting in yourself and your own military. You trust me, and I will lead you to victory over the nations that have iron chariots and horses. But he gets this entourage. He's got 50, I don't know if it's 50 chariots, but 50 men with the chariots and the horses. And they go out in front of him wherever he's going somewhere. So it's quite a show, quite a parade. And Absalom gets the idea that he stops at the gate of the city, and people were coming to the king. And sometimes the king would provide for them answers to some disputes they might have with a neighbor or family, controversies they had, some lawsuits they might have, some translations say. And so he starts talking to these folks. He said, what city are you from? That's a great way to get to know somebody. Where are you from? So he opens some contact with them. And then after that, he says, well, what tribe are you part of? And so he engages them in some conversation and gets to know them a little bit. And then he finds out, well, they've got some concerns they wanted to bring to the king. He said, your case is good. He hears it, and he says, it's good and right. You're right to be here. But, you know, there's no deputy of the king to hear you. Now, I don't know if that was true or not. But he's in essence saying that the king doesn't have anybody in place, that you can go to them, talk to them, and then if it's a case that needs to go to the king, they can take it to the king. So, what he says in verse 4, oh, that I were made judge in the land, and everyone who has any suit or cause would come to me, then I would give him justice. That's pretty bold, isn't it? I wish I could do this. I think I can do this. What's he doing? He wants the throne. He wants the throne. And maybe he knows that Amnon is gone. The firstborn's gone. So it was that whatever anybody came near to bow down, they bowed down to him. He would put out his hand and take that person. He would kiss him. So not only has he talked to them and got a relationship with them, told them they got a good case, I'd be glad to take care of it. And then he kisses them. And in this manner, Absalom acted toward all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. I'm glad you said it. No, that's right. There's politics here, sadly enough. And it worked. It worked. I said Amnon was the first. There was a second. Absalom was third in the birth line. And the second one is Chileab, who's also called Daniel in 1 Chronicles 3:10. And that's the only time he's mentioned. Chapter 3 and then 1 Chronicles. So I don't know where he is. He was actually, I believe, the son of Abigail. So here we are. Absalom says, okay. And David, when he hears about this, is going to think to himself, yes, Lord, I know. You told me that adversaries are going to rise from my own people. And Absalom is going to try to take the throne away from his father. And that's where we will be, God willing, on Sunday morning. So the rest of chapter 15, go ahead and read that, please. I am going to try to do a better job. I looked up some things today and find psalms that go with the chapters, and some believe there are 2 or 3 psalms that go with this chapter. And you can imagine David pouring his heart out to God when he's going through all of this turmoil. Thoughts or comments, please? Thank you. Appreciate you listening so well. We'll press on about verse number 7, chapter 15, God willing, Sunday.
Good evening. It's good to see everyone out. Our first song tonight will be 190, We're Marching to Zion. After Sammy's talk, we will sing number 329, God Calling Yet. Come we that love the Lord, and let our joys be known. Join in a song with sweet accord, join in a song with sweet accord, and thus around the throne, and thus around the throne. We're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion. We're marching upward to Zion, the beautiful city of God. Let those refuse to sing who never knew our God, but children of the heavenly King, but children of the heavenly King may speak their joys abroad, may speak their joys abroad. We're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion. We're marching upward to Zion, the beautiful city of God. Then let our songs abound and every tear be dried. We're marching through Emmanuel's ground. We're marching through Emmanuel's ground to fairer worlds on high, to fairer worlds on high. We're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion. We're marching upward to Zion, the beautiful city of God.
Good evening. It's beautiful weather that we're having, I'm going to be honest. Come out and say that. But this is the time that we have put aside to gather together as a group of Christians to be encouraged by one another. This is the time that we come together in the middle of the week to do this. But I mean, I know that whenever I was younger, I didn't really see much of the point because I thought, well, we come on Sundays and we come Sunday nights. Why do we have to come a third time in the middle of the week of all times? We're all here gathered to worship God again? Why? Why are we here to be encouraged by each other? If you want to go ahead and turn your Bibles to Romans chapter 5, verses 3 through 5. We're going to be reading there in just a second. I know that I get extremely fatigued during this time of the week, and I'm sure that some of you guys do as well. Some of you feel this midweek fatigue, whether it be from work or from, maybe you're parenting kids and it's the middle of the week and you just want to make it to the weekend. Everyone loves a Friday. And we learn that through our persistence and perseverance through the week and this encouragement that we get from one another and from the Lord ultimately. That's how we make it through to the end of the ultimate goal. So Romans chapter 5, verses 3 through 5. Not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope, and hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. We do all things through Christ who strengthens us. Philippians 4:13. I'm not going to make you turn there. But everything that we do, all of our strength, all of our grit, and the want to continue and to endure and to press on in life's challenges, because there are going to be many. We know we're going to have many challenges, and this is the time that we come together to encourage one another. And it's also a time that we offer an invitation to those who maybe haven't found the Lord, to those who are seeking that strength through the Lord and seeking the ability to persevere such as we do. see the happiness that we enjoy because we know that there's something greater than this wretched world that we spend every single day in, because we know that the Lord has a plan for us. So if you're not part of that group, if you're not a Christian, we invite you to come forward as we stand, as we sing a song of invitation.
God calling, yet shall I not hear? Earth's pleasure shall I still hold dear? Shall life's swift passing years all fly, and still my soul in slumber lie? God is calling, calling yet. God is calling, sinner heed his pleading voice. God calling, yet shall I not rise? Can I his loving voice despise, and basely his kind cares repay? He calls me still, can I delay? God is calling, calling yet. God is calling, sinner heed his pleading voice. God calling, yet I cannot stay. My heart I yield without delay. Vain world, farewell, from thee I part. The voice of God has reached my heart. God is calling, calling yet. God is calling, sinner heed his pleading voice. Please be seated.
Good evening. If you're visiting with us tonight, we're certainly glad that you're here with us, and you'll take every opportunity that you can to worship with us. We'll meet again here at 9:30 on Sunday morning, so please join us again then. And please stay around for a few minutes afterwards and let's get a chance to meet you and get to know you better. I only have a couple of new announcements from Sunday. Oliver Crawford will get his tonsils out tomorrow morning at 9:45, so let's keep little Oliver in our prayers and hope that that all goes well and he recovers well. And I talked to David about Angela's dad and Gordon's brother, Gary. He says he's doing better than he was Sunday, but let's just continue to keep him in our prayers also. So let's keep up on our Bible reading. Again, 2 Samuel 11 through 15, I believe, yes, 11 through 15 this week. Let's keep our gospel meeting, which will be upon us really quickly. Start on May 21st through the 24th with Andy Cantrell. Let's be telling our friends and neighbors and be inviting them. And it's just a reminder, this Sunday there will not be our small groups. We'll all meet here at the building, and so there'll be no small group on this second Sunday of this month. That is all I had for tonight. Men, is there anything that I failed to announce? If not, Brian's going to lead us in a closing prayer. Please stand.
Let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you for this day. Thank you for the opportunity you've given us to come here in the middle of the week to worship you, to remind ourselves of what we're here for and who we're here to serve. Help us to use this to further glorify you throughout this week and bear more fruit for your kingdom and others to see your light. I'd like to pray now for Oliver, for his surgery coming up. Help that to go well and be helpful for him. Be with Angela and her dad and their family in that situation. Be comfort to all of them and let your power be shown through that. I'd like to pray for our upcoming gospel meeting. Help that to go well, the preparation to go well. Let us do our part to invite friends and neighbors and to be here each night to be able to hear some of your word and glorify you. Also to pray for preparations for our VBS, help those to go well, but to find ways we can contribute and help that to be a success, for more seed to be planted and watered, and for you to provide the growth from that. Help us as we go through the rest of this week to keep you first, and others to see that in us. In Your name we pray.